Welcome to part 8 of Introduction to 3D Studio Max, Building the Death Scene. In this tutorial, we're going to talk about rendering and lighting. Now, rendering is when you take your 3D scene and export it to a 2D image. All right, so let me show you a couple different options for this. Every program has what we call render engines. So a default engine, which always came standard with the program, then later on they would add an engine for physically accurate lighting. In 3D Studio Max, we actually have several different types of engines. If you come up to this render tab here, if you don't see this because you're running an older version of Max, and I'll show you where to find this here in a sec. So if I click this, you have iRay, Mental Ray, Quicksilver, and the Default Scanline. We're going to be using the Default Scanline Renderer for this tutorial, and then the next one we'll probably use Mental Ray. Those are the two options I tend to use the most. I don't really use Quicksilver or iRay because my computer doesn't like them, doesn't like to handle them. So I stick with Mental Ray and the Default Scanline Renderer. Okay, so like I said, we're going to be using the Default Scanline Renderer. If you have an older version of Max, make sure you're in the Common tab, go all the way down to the bottom of the list, and choose Assign Renderer. And right here where it says Default Scanline, this is where you can choose the other renderers. Now, if you're running a really older version of Max, you're probably only going to see Mental Ray and the View options. You're not going to see Quicksilver or iRay. So let me go ahead and cancel. So like I said, we're going to start with the Default Scanline Renderer. Now, choosing the renderer will dictate what kind of lights I'm allowed to use. So I'm going to go to the Create panel, Lights. I'm going to come out of Photometric and go to Standard. So I know I can't use the Mental Ray lights. I have to stick with the standard lighting. So I'm going to click the word Omni. Now, the Omni is an all-directional light. So I'm going to start with that. I'm going to click it into my scene. And now when you create a light in the scene, it overrides the default lighting that was in Max that allowed us to see things as we rendered, and it replaces it with our new lighting setup. So I'm going to move this into the scene, let's say right about here for now. So I'm going to maximize this viewport, Alt-W, so we can see what's going on. So I'm going to go to the Modify panel, and here's the settings for the light, of course. We can choose a different type of light. The next tab down is do we want shadows. So right now if I click Render without shadows on, you're going to see that the objects don't cast any shadows. All right, now if I turn on shadows and click Render, you can see now that the objects are casting shadows. So you have a couple shadow options. You have ray tracing shadows, you have Mental Ray shadows. Obviously we're not using Mental Ray, so we can't use this one. And we have area shadows. Now, I don't ever use area shadows. I can't think of a time I actually used it because I really can't get this to give me a good look. So I stick with either shadow map or ray trace shadows. Now, shadow map is going to give you a softer shadow and ray trace is going to give you a harder shadow. So let me click on this and just show you. Click render. And you can see here it's going to be a very sharp shadow. Okay, so I'm going to stick with shadow map for now. Next tab down is the brightness and color of the light. So you can see here multiplier is set to 1. Let's just say that's 100%. And then the color here, I can change it to any color I want. All right. And of course, if you dial this below 1, it's going to be less than 100%. And if you go above 1, it's going to be more than 100%. So anyway, moving forward, we have a decay option. This deals with light fading away as it gets away from the actual light source. So let me go ahead and position this light. This light is going to be called monitor, or I'm just going to say M light for monitor light. I'm going to go Alt-W to go in the quad view. I'm going to put it in the center of the monitor, and I'm going to move it as close to the monitor as I can, because this light's going to represent the light that would be shining off the monitor when it's on. So let's say something like that. That should be close enough. Come back to here, and I'm going to hit Alt-W. Okay, so we have the light in position. Let's go ahead and turn on decay. So you saw the light without decay on it. I'm going to turn it on. I'm going to say inverse square. And if you click show, it's already showing the wireframe and it shouldn't, but anyway, we're going to check show. And I'm going to drop this down to, let's say, 0.5. All right. So you can see here, it's right around here is when it's going to start decaying away from the light. So I'm going to go ahead and hit render. And you can see here the scene is a lot dimmer because the light is starting to decay from this point as it goes into the room. All right, so I'm going to hit cancel. That's pretty good. I can dial it up more or even less. Let's say 0.2 and click render. You can see here it's really dark now. the scene is barely being lit, like the back wall, but things that are closer to the light will be lit more. So that's one way of controlling the light in the scene. I'm going to go ahead and cancel this. I'm going to set this to none. Another way is to use far and near attenuation. All right, so I never really use near unless I'm doing some kind of special effect to the light. In this case, we're not. So I'm going to just use far. So I'm going to click Use and Show. Now what this does, I'm going to turn off Show here so I'm not seeing that little blue wireframe. This will give me the ability to control how far the light will cast. So I'm going to set both these values to 0 and dial this one up. Okay, so I want it to stop casting to about there. So the light's not going to go beyond this sphere. And I'm going to hit render. Okay, you can see it's barely hitting the wall because I'm barely hitting the wall with the actual scene. Let me hit cancel. Okay, so that's really cool. Now the start point will deal with when it starts fading out. So it could be super bright to about there, and then the light starts fading out. So I'm going to click render. Now you can see the light's more harsh while hitting these objects. Okay, so it gives me more control over exactly how the light's working. So let me go ahead and dial this down, let's say to about there, and see what that looks like. That's better. All right, so let me go ahead and hit cancel and make sure I'm setting my settings to the color of a light blue. And that's because the overall tone in the monitor is a light blue. So I want the light to be casting an overall light blue. Say something like that. Now if I click render, you can see things are getting this light blue tint. Okay, that looks good. So the next light I want to create is, let's say outside it's dark. This is nighttime and we got a light shining through the window. Now before I create that, I need to create a top piece to my a ceiling to my room. So I'm going to go ahead and go Alt W. And in my top viewport, which is this one, I'm going to create a box. So I'm going to go to the create panel, object, box, click and drag a box. I'm going to move it up. Let's say to about there. And I'm going to go ahead and go to the modify panel. Actually, I'm going to go to the material editor and find the same material I used in the walls, which was this one. Click and drag it. Okay. So now that my room is actually sealed in from this side, so let's go ahead and create the moon shining through the window. So I'm going to go to the create panel, go to light, and this time I'm going to use a target spot. Okay. And I'm going to click on that. And in my left viewport, I'm going to click and drag, and you can see here it creates a light and then a targeting device for the light. And I'm actually using the wrong viewport, so I'm going to Control Z that. It's my front viewport that I want, because I want it coming through the window. So let's say something like that. And of course I can click on the light itself and position it, and I can position the actual helper as well. Now, to help me, so I'm not accidentally selecting anything else in my scene, I'm going to come up to here and say lights. So from now on, it will only allow me to select the lights in my scene. You can see here I can't select anything else, just the lights. So that's very useful. So let me bring this light up a little bit more to about there. That's good. Okay, we'll call this moonlight. So I'll go to the modify panel, moonlight. I definitely want to turn on shadows, so that way the walls are blocking the light. And let's see, shadows are on. I'm going to go into intensity and attenuation. I'm going to bring this more towards the white area, with a little bit of blue tint. And let's see, decay, I'm not going to set. I'm not going to use far. So everything else should be good. So let's go ahead and click render and see what this looks like. You can see here now the blinds look like they're getting hit by light. And I'm not going to be able to let this render all the way through, so you can see the shadowing hitting the objects from the blinds and the walls. So let me go ahead and hit cancel for now. I probably want to select on the window just to be on the safe side. Oops, I need to switch this back to all. Remember, I was only able to select the lights and make sure that it's open. It is open, because that might actually block the light too. So it definitely is open. If you're concerned about the window blocking the light and it is causing you problems, what you can do is click on the light and go to, let's see here, advanced settings, I think. Nope, right here. Under shadows, say exclude, and you can choose an object to exclude from. So if we go and find our window, which is probably down at the bottom, did I ever name my window? Probably not. This is why naming is very important. Oh, it is called sliding window. Okay. So now I just got to look for sliding window. Sliding window. There it is, sliding window. And I click this arrow to add it to exclude. Now I can click include, so that's the only thing it's including, but I want to exclude it. And I can choose, am I excluding just illumination or shadow casting? To be honest, I just need shadow casting. I don't need it blocking my light. So I'm going to click OK. So now the window won't affect the actual light for right now. Okay, so we're looking good moving forward. Now let's go ahead and pull this in, get our angle going. I'm going to click render. It's looking better. All right, so there's one more light I want to create for this particular scene, and that is because we're not using physically accurate lighting, so bounce lighting, I want to add an extra light that barely lights the back walls, so it's not so dark. So I'm going to go to the Create panel, choose Omni Light again, and I'm going to click in my scene, and I'll raise it to near where the monitor height was as well. So pretty much want to position it in the same spot, except for I don't want it so close to the monitor. So maybe something like this. And I'm going to turn on, sorry, go to the Modify panel, and I'm going to do the far and use for a far attenuation, or sorry, show and use. And I'm going to go ahead and dial this up to where it's barely hitting the walls. And I'm going to decrease the multiplier by 0.2. Okay, so this is kind of like just adding more light to my scene and also making it look like there's some bounce lighting happening on the walls. All right, so let's go ahead and render this. And then obviously that's way too hot. 0.2 is way too much light. So let's decrease this to, let's say, 0.05. That's still way too hot. In fact, instead of using far and use, I'm going to use far attenuation. Let's go to inverse square, show, and let's start this probably somewhere around there. Let's see what that gives me. That's a little bit better. Actually, it's a lot better. So I'm giving the room a little bit more light. I hit cancel. Instead of using a blue tint though, I'm going to scroll more toward a white tint and click render. All right, that's definitely better. Much better. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and hit cancel. I think probably the multiplier can be brought down more, so let's go 0.3 or 0.03 I should say. Yeah, that's a little bit better. Still not quite exactly where I want it, so I'm going to go 0.02. Click render. Yeah, much better. Much, much better. Okay, so it gave a little bit more light to our scene, brought a little more detail out, and I think we're looking good. So I'm going to go ahead and hit cancel because, like I said, this thing takes forever to render the lower glass area. So let's go ahead and save this. Let's rename the center light. So it's selected. Let's go B light for bounce light. All right, so let's go ahead and turn on shadows, and I am going to click render. And you can see here it's creating very, very dark shadows against the wall. We want to change that and play with that. So let's go to more settings. I'm going to minimize intensity. In fact, actually, before I do want to bring this up. Let's say 0.4. And then I'm going to minimize it. Click render, see what kind of outcome I've got. So the shadows are darker and the walls are a little bit brighter. Hit cancel. and close this. Okay, so let's go to Advanced Effects. And here I can control the contrast and the soften diffuse edge. It's actually softened between the diffuse and the ambient. Ambient, if I just check this, the whole scene will just give this flat look. I can actually have the light not effective diffuse by unchecking this, or not affect specular by unchecking this. So if I've got a weird specular pattern happening in, let's say, the monitor from this light, I can turn this off. But I didn't see any of that, so I'm not going to worry about it. And you can also project an image or a video file from the projector map here. And it's best used for like a directional light like you see in a movie theater. So let me go ahead and minimize this. Jump into shadow map parameters. In here, we can actually control the density and the color. So if I wanted to be very artistic with this, I can click on the color and let's give it a yellow. Yellow mellow. Quite right. Okay, so you can see here that the shadow now is a yellow tone. And obviously it's not going to work for our particular scene, but like I said, if you're trying to tell some crazy psychedelic story, this might actually help you out with that effect. So I'm going to go ahead and hit cancel, close this, and I'm going to switch it back to black. Click OK. Now the density, like I said, is too hard, so I'm going to switch it to, let's say, 0.3. Enter. Click render. And you can see here my shadow is barely visible now. It's still there, but it's very, very, very light. And hopefully you can see this through the render cast. I'm going to hit cancel. And just to show you again, let me do yellow. Click OK. And render. And the yellow won't be so extreme like it was before. Okay. So I'm going to hit cancel. Bring this back to black. I can use an image in the shadow. So let's say I had a puppet shadow going on. I can actually project that into the shadows, which would be a really cool effect. Again, for something that's trying to tell an interesting story or a very artistic story. And if I had atmospheric effects in my scene, I can affect those atmospheric effects by playing with these settings here. So I'm going to go ahead and minimize this. Shadow map parameters, that's the next one we're going to go into. This one is actual settings for the shadows themselves for this particular shadow map. If I switch this to, let's say, ray trace shadows, that tab becomes ray trace shadow parameters. Okay. So let me go back to shadow map. So shadow map parameters. The bias is basically the distance between the shadow and the object. So let me pull up a reference here. Scroll up here. So this is the bias right here. This is a regular bias of 1. This is a bias of like 4 or 3 or something. I don't know what it is. But anyway, it's definitely a higher number because the shadow is no longer near the object. Okay. If you are going to play with this setting, play with it at the point value. So go 1.1 or 1.2 or 0.9, 0.8. Don't really go higher than that because you'll get some crazy end results that probably aren't going to look good. This tends to be what used when you're having issues with shadow bleeding, because shadow map is actually projecting an image in the scene. And if objects are too close together, it might have some issues with them. So to separate the shadow from the image might help clean it up. Okay. So next is the size. Now, like I said, shadow map is an image. So you can see here, a size of 32 looks very pixelated, and a size of 256 looks less pixelated. So the higher the number, the less pixelation you're going to get, and the more detail you're going to get in the shadow. Next option down is sample range. What that does is blurs the pixels in the shadow. So it gives you a very soft edge. And that's why we're using shadow map, because I wanted that soft edge. Okay. So now that you know what these settings are, let's go ahead and minimize this and play with, say, 512. Let's go let's go 1024. Okay, so that's going to give me a higher shadow map, and you're not really going to see much of a difference in this scene because it's so dark. But usually I like to bring it up to 1024 or 2048. Sometimes I've even brought up my shadow maps to 4096, depending on the scene. But anyway, so 1024 should be good, and I'll just double the sample range. So let's say 8. And I'll do the same thing for the light that's actually in front of the monitor light. So let's say 1024 by 8. And like I said, I highly doubt we're going to see really that much of a difference in this scene. Not really. Am I getting any weird shadows? No, I'm good. Click cancel. Close this out. Okay, so we have sample range, absolute map bias. So again, that you're checking that and playing with this setting here. I don't remember what they said about that. I've never really used it. Anyway, the next section down is double-sided shadows. So let's say in this case, they're showing you if you have an object that you cut open that you didn't add a shell modifier to, so the inside polygons are technically not supposed to be visible. If you tried creating shadows, it's going to ignore the inside of the polygons and create these holes. But if you checked double-sided shadows, what that's going to do is project the shadow from the inside of the polygon, okay? So it's going to basically recognize the polygon as a full polygon, not a one-sided object. All right. In my case, I don't have any open empty objects like this, so I don't need it on. Let me go ahead and minimize that. The next tab down is atmosphere and effects. In this case, we're not going to apply it to either one of these lights. We are going to apply an atmosphere effect to the outdoor light. Basically, you just click add and you get a couple options, volume light and lens effect. Like I said, I'm not going to use either or. The last couple of tabs are for mental ray indirect illumination. This deals with the way light bounces around the scene. And the next option down is mental ray, and the shader. This gives you the ability to bring in a material to control the light in various different ways. So like I said, we're not using mental ray right now, so those tabs are useless. All right, so let's go ahead and select the outdoor light, the moonlight. And let me zoom out here. And let's click render. Okay, so our scene's looking good, but maybe I want to have some kind of volumetric happening coming from the window to just spice up the scene a little bit. So let me hit cancel, close this. I'm going to go to atmospheric and effects. I'm going to click add, and I'm going to choose volume light. I'm going to click OK. Now, if I click render now, you're going to get volume light passing through the window. Okay. So just to show you real quick though, if you have advanced ray trace shadow maps on and you click render, you're going to get this because it doesn't understand how to control volume light. This only works with shadow maps. It doesn't even work with area shadows. So you have to stay on shadow maps. Okay. So I'm going to hit cancel, and let's play with getting this to look a little bit better. Let's go back to shadow map parameters, and let's increase the size of the map to 2048, and click render. You can see here now I'm getting very harsh horizontal and vertical lines, which creates an interesting look, but not what I'm going for. I'm going to hit cancel. Let's increase the sample range, so let's say 24. So we can blur the shadow map. And you can see here doing so increases the render time. It's starting to slow down. But it did clean up that weird vertical effect that I was getting. Still not the result I want, but it is better. I'm going to go ahead and hit cancel. I'm going to go the opposite direction now. Instead of doing 2048, I'm going to do 256. Oops. So that's half of 512. 256. And I'll bring the sample range back down to 4 and click render. So now I'm getting a softer beam edge coming through. But I'm still getting some horizontal or vertical lines here. To clean that up, I would probably play with the sample range. Let's bring this up to 8. And that's a little bit better, but still not what I want. So let's go down even more. So half of 256 is 128. And I'll bring the sample range to 4 and click render. That's more like it. Now I'm getting these ray lights coming through. That's actually looking pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and hit cancel. Basically, these are the two settings you want to play with to affect the way the light looks or the way it's being casted through the window. However, we do have a few other things we need to change. I'm going to go ahead and hit cancel. Let's go ahead and go click on light and say setup. Now this gives me the parameter window for environmental effects. I played with this earlier, that's why I have two volume light effects in here. So I'm going to select the first one and hit delete and just focus on the one we just added. Okay, so I added this to the moonlight. So we have the light setting here. Next section is dealing with the color and the density. So the density is way too hot for me, but I'm going to leave it for right now. The max light percentage, so how much of the actual max light is it going to use, and how much of the minimum light is it going to use to affect the scene. But really what the settings I want to play with is density and noise, if I'm going to add noise. So let's go ahead and add some noise. I'm going to click add noise, and it's 0 to 1 is the amount, so I'm going to say 1. And I think that's it. Let's just go ahead and hit render and see what the result is. So you can see here now I'm getting these weird splotches of light. I'm going to hit cancel. Let's take the size down to 2 and click render. And you can see here it's creating almost more of like a dust effect in the scene. Actually, this would be something like underwater. That's what I would use for an underwater effect. Anyway, cancel. So you have the choice of what kind of noise effect you're applying. There's fractal and turbulence. Let me try fractal and change the size to 10 and hit render. That's a bit better. Hit cancel. So density, I would bring it down, but I'm not going to use noise. If you're going to use noise in an animated scene, you might want to play with phase. Now, phase actually moves the noise around. You would want to animate it. And I know I haven't talked about animation yet, but we will here in a sec. But you would animate the phase. You can even animate the strength of the wind if you want to add wind and have it blow around. And of course, the noise amount right here, let's say if I take this to 0.5, it's going to decrease how much noise is affecting the light. You can see it pulled it way down so it's not so extreme. And actually that's not too bad. Just to break up the light a little bit, as if there was dust or something moving through the scene. Let's go 0.3. Okay. And of course I can choose turbulence as well instead of fractal, depending on what kind of look I'm going for. I think fractal was definitely better. Okay. So like I said, you'd animate phase, you'd increase wind strength if you want to make it look like the dust or noise is being moved through the scene. I'm going to go ahead and close this for now. Close this. Actually, whoops, I did not want to close that. Let me go back to setup. The density, 0.5. Actually, we're at 5. I'm going to say 2. Let's do 2. Again, that was too hard for me. Too much in the scene, too extreme. 2's better for sure, but still not good enough. So I'm going to say density of 1. Okay, much better. Like the 1. It's not too extreme. Just a nice subtle effect is what I'm after. Maybe even 1.5. Okay, now you're seeing this weird lighting effect at the wall back here. And let's figure out which light that's coming from. I think it's coming from the moonlight, so let's test it. Close these windows. With the moonlight selected, I'm going to turn it off right here, so uncheck on. And I'm going to click render. Yep, you can see here that line is gone now. So to fix this issue, what I'm going to do is with the light selected, I'm going to turn it back on and open up advanced or spotlight parameters. And right here where it says hot beam, I'm going to decrease that, and you'll watch that in the viewport decrease the cone. So maybe something like that, and then decrease the fall off area so it's not hitting the wall in this corner. Now if I click render, that cleaned it up tremendously. All right, and I'm still getting my volumetric light coming into my scene. So I'm going to click cancel. Close this. We're looking good. So next step is let's set up a camera. So I'm going to choose the position of the scene here. I'm going to go Alt W, zoom in, maybe a little bit higher. So let's say that's going to be my first position of my camera. I can hit Control C on the keyboard, and that's going to create a camera. Let me go Alt W in my scene. Now it's using the physical camera, which is something new to I think 2016. So you might not see this particular camera, but you will see a camera. All right. So the physical camera, like I said, is a new system, so I'm not going to use it. I'm going to go ahead and hit delete. And since the Control C shortcut key for creating the camera in the viewport goes to physical, I'm going to go to the create panel and manually create it. So here's the camera parameters. And I have, this is the physical one, that's the one it created. And then I have target and free. The only difference between target and free is the free camera has no targeting device. You just move and rotate the camera itself. And the target camera actually has a targeting device, just like the light setup. So I'm going to go ahead and click on target. And in my top viewport, I'm going to click and drag. Let's say something like that. Okay, so now that I have both the camera and the target, I'm going to select the blue line in between them. That selects both elements. And I'm going to move it up. In my perspective viewport, I'm going to click on the word perspective. And I'm going to choose camera, or C on the keyboard as a shortcut key. So now I'm viewing it from the camera perspective. Click on the camera and start rotating it, or not rotating it, but positioning it, because you can't rotate it since it's attached to a target, but you can position it. And if I switch my positioning option to from view to local, it allows me to have the control off the local axis for the camera. So maybe start something like this. All right, now grabbing the camera point sometimes might be difficult, or the target part of the camera. If you come up here and choose cameras, what this does is it'll only allow you to select the camera elements in the scene, nothing else. So I can't select anything else in my scene, just the camera elements. So let me bring this up just a bit. Oops, I have too many things selected. Move this up, say about there, maybe a little bit more down. Okay, I think that's going to work. All right, I want to see exactly what it's going to be rendered out. So I'm going to click on the word camera, and I'm going to come down to show save frame, which is also Shift F on the keyboard. That's exactly what I would see on the render output. All right, so let's just go ahead and hit render. And there you have it. I'm going to hit cancel, close this. So let's go ahead and set up the render settings, because I want this to be HD TV settings. I'm going to click on the render button, the render setup button, and I'm going to choose right here in the common tab, output size. I'm going to switch it from custom to HD TV. And that gives you settings for HD TV. The lowest setting would be 1280 by 720, and the highest setting would be 1920 by 1080. Okay, so we're definitely going to stick with the 1920 by 1080. That looks good. And if we click render, you can see now our scene is a lot bigger. Now I'm viewing this a 1:2 ratio. Excuse me. So if I zoom in here, now that's 1:1. That's the full image right there, or 100% viewed, I should say. So you can see here it takes a lot longer to render when it's a larger image. So I'm going to cancel. Let's set up some animation. So with the camera selected, I'm going to come down here to auto key, and I'm going to turn this on. And what this does, anytime I move something in the scene and I change the position of my timeline, it will add a keyframe for me. Now 100 frames I don't think is long enough. I think this scene needs to be, let's say, 3 seconds. Actually no, 4 seconds. Let's do 4 seconds. And if it's 30 frames per second, that means we need 120 frames for 4 seconds. 4 times 3 is 12. You know, simple math. So I'm going to click on this. Whoops. I'm going to click on this icon right here in the corner or bottom. And I'm going to choose the end time to being 120 frames. And right here, it's telling me I'm at 30 frames per second. So I can switch this to film if I wanted to, PAL, custom, anything I wanted. So at 30 frames per second, 120 frames is 4 seconds. 3 times 4, 12. Very simple math. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. So now I have a timeline of 120 frames. You can see it changed. So at frame 1, I'm going to click with the camera selected. I'm going to click this key right here, and that sets a keyframe. And it sets a keyframe for X, Y, Z, move, rotate, scale, and move, rotate, or sorry, X, Y, Z position as well. So let me go ahead and take the time slider and move it all the way to 120 frames. And I'm going to come in my scene and position my camera for the end shot. So where do I want this camera to end? Maybe a little bit closer. All right, so now if I click and grab the time slider, you can see I have an animation. Congratulations, that is your first animation in 3D Studio Max. Okay. So let's go ahead, and I don't like the position of the target at the end frame, so I'm going to select the target, and I'm going to go back to frame 1, and I'm going to click the keyframe. Again, I have the target selected, keyframe, and I'm going to go back to frame 120, and I'm just going to move it, and you can see here, like I said, it automatically creates keyframes for you because we have auto key on. Bring it up. Maybe a little bit like this. So I'm going to turn auto key off. Anytime I'm done animating, I make sure I turn this off because otherwise you might start animating things in your scene that you didn't want to. So let me go ahead and hit this arrow here. It goes back to the start of the timeline and hit play. And you can see here, there's my animation. Congratulations, you have now officially created your first animation in 3D Studio Max. Hooray, throw a party. Okay, so we have our animation of our camera. Let's talk about keyframes in themselves. So we're going to actually open up something called Track View or Curve Editor up here. Click on it. And what I'm going to do is click this icon and this icon. And let's focus on the position. Why is it not showing me the timeline? Zoom out. Should be here. Okay, so I guess I'm going to have to focus on, I forgot, 3ds Max, I actually have to click on each individual one to see them. So you can see here under position for camera 1, this is the target. I've got X, Y, and Z. And I also have rotation, but I didn't rotate anything, so these are useless keys. In fact, I can drag over them. Let me select all 3 by holding down Shift, drag over them, and hit Delete. That's under the rotation again. Now, I don't want to do that to the position on any of the position keys. And let's go to Scale. Because when you hit this big keyframe here, it sets a keyframe for everything, rotation, position, and scale. I don't need that keyframe either. Now that's the camera target. If I select the camera now in my scene, same thing. Here's my position keys. And this one doesn't have any rotation keys because it's got a target. You can see here, here's the target. Okay, so let's play with, right now I actually like the fact that it's linear based, that there isn't an ease in and ease out. But you might want to have an ease in, meaning that it's going to start out slow, speed up, and then slow down. Okay, so to do that, what you can do is select these keyframes here at the beginning and click any one of these icons up here. I'm going to click Set Tangents. So you can see here it's softened out or bent these keyframes, or these lines, I should say. So let me go ahead and hit the play button. You can see here it starts out slower, speeds up, and then just all of a sudden stops. So now I can grab these last keyframes and do the same thing. This is Auto Bezier, by the way. And now if I click play, speed up, slow down. Starts out slow, speeds up, slow down. I really don't like that look for this particular scene, but if you wanted to, that's how you can do it. And you can actually play with the tangent handles, by clicking on them and moving them. Okay, so this is time frame, and this is how much it changes over time, the height. Okay, so let me go ahead and reset all mine back to no ease in and ease out, because that's what we had created. So let me go ahead and go back to the front of the animation, click play, and there you have it. Now, just a side note, if I select both keyframes at the end and the beginning, Oh, wow, it's not. There we go. This bar down here gives me the ability to slide the keyframes, or I can just grab the keyframe and slide it. But the problem is when I grab the keyframe when they're both selected, it slides both of them. When I grab this bar down here, it actually pinches the keyframes together. Okay? So that's how you control the timeline. Or you can just grab an individual keyframe and move it. All right, so there is our animation. So I'm going to go ahead and render this out. And let's talk about render settings, actually output. So let's go up to render setup. So we have the size set. We want to do active time segments, so 0 to 120. You can also set in a range. And I'm going to come down here to render output. So let's click File. And you're going to want to save this somewhere where you can find it. I'm going to save it into our work to Trap CG, tutorials, 3D Studio Max Desk, 3D. And I'm going to create a new folder in here called 3D Render. So new folder, 3D _ render. Okay, double click on that. And in here, because I might do different types of renders of the scene, I'm going to create one more folder called render 1. Okay. So the reason why I want to put this in a folder is because I never render out QuickTime files. I always render out images or AVIs. I don't render out video files. Now you can render out a video file. If you click here and you go AVI, you can render out an AVI file. You can actually render out a QuickTime movie file. And you can hit the word setup here and choose the PNG. Oh, this is QuickTime PNG. Oh, hit the plus sign, I think. No? What is QuickTime movie file? Whoa. Sorry. It froze on me. So, oh, there it goes. Sorry, it popped up in a sub window that was underneath everything. This is the window that I wanted. And let me hit cancel. That window was found when I clicked setup. Really? QuickTime movie. There it goes. Okay, so this is the window that I wanted. You can see here it's really interfering with my graphics card. But anyway, this gives me the option to choose what kind of compressor I want. If I was going to do a QuickTime movie, I would do a PNG QuickTime movie. I would not do any of the other options. Unless I was just trying to do a quick export to, let's say, YouTube, then I would probably choose H.264. But PNG gives me the best results for the best file size coming out of QuickTime. So I'm going to hit cancel. All right, so like I said, I do not do movies. Primarily why is what happens if I'm rendering out this 120 frames and it gets to frame 119 and then the computer crashes. And it took 10 hours to do it. You just wasted 10 hours of rendering because you rendered out a QuickTime movie that just got corrupted when it crashed. So what we want to choose is an image file. It could be JPEGs, it could be TIFFs, Targas. I like to use PNGs. Okay, so PNG, and then I'll give it a name. So we're inside the render 1 folder, and I'll call this desk scene 1. Okay. In fact, actually, I don't like to have the number at the very end because it's going to give me numbers after that for each frame. So desk 1 scene. All right. So that's set in place. I'm going to click save. It's going to ask me what kind of format I want to have it in for the PNG, 42-bit. That's good. I don't really have anything in my scene to warrant an alpha channel, so I probably can turn this off. But if I did and I needed the alpha channel, I'd keep that on. Click OK. And we're set to go. So all you need to do is click render now, and it will start rendering out each frame. Okay, I stopped this real quick. To render out this glass was taking way too much time. Way too much time. I mean, it was just sitting here, just slowly chugging down. So I'm going to go ahead and close this out. I'm going to go to material. And I'm not even sure if I can find that glass material quickly. Is it this one? Glass cup. Yep. So let's just go ahead and modify this. Instead of being a reflection and a refraction going on. Whoops. I'm going to change this and opacity. I'm going to bring that back off Let's just change this to a plastic cup. What color is plastic cups? It could be white, I guess. Now let's do something interesting. Let's do it slightly like a green cup that we got some kind of convention somewhere. One of those ugly green cups that you find. Let's decrease the level of glossiness because this would be more plastic than it would be glass. And that should be it. So, and opacity I'm going to bring up to 100%. Okay. Of course I can probably spend more time with it, but maybe even bring down the color more to a dark green. Alright. Alright, now I'm going to go ahead and hit render again. Make sure it's set to save, file save. It's definitely saving. Let me save my scene. Click render. And I'm going to go ahead and stop this and pick it up again. It's finished, so let me go ahead and minimize this. Here's all my frames. The reason why I render out frames again is because if it crashes, let's say at 109, I can render 109 to 120, and I'll have to render everything starting from scratch. If it was a movie file, I'd have to start from scratch because it will corrupt the movie file. So now we need to get these into another program so we can actually render it out as a full movie file. And that could be Premiere, After Effects, Vegas Video. I'm not quite sure Final Cut will import an image sequence, but don't quote me on that. I think last time I tried testing it didn't work. But anyway, you can use a couple different programs out there. I'm going to choose, you can even do Blender as well. Blender has an editing system. But I'm going to actually choose After Effects. The reason why I'm choosing After Effects is because the interface pretty much hasn't changed for like 10 versions or 5 versions at least. So it'll be familiar even if you're using older versions of After Effects. So we just need to import those images in. To do so, we're going to go to the Projects panel here, right click, Import, File. And we're going to choose the first image. And you're going to make sure PNG sequence is checked. Now in Premiere, I think it says image sequence is checked. So definitely make sure it's checked so it will grab all these images and bring them in as one movie file. So I'm going to say import. You can see here it's one video clip. Now I'm going to drag and drop this to the timeline and it will automatically create the composition for me. Otherwise you have to go composition, new composition, and set the settings to what you rendered out of 3D Studio Max. So 30 frames per second, 1920 by 1080, and the length I think was 4 seconds. So I'm going to go ahead and hit cancel. We already have the comp here, and that's what this scene is. So if I hit 0 on the numeric keypad, it will actually render this out. And if you don't have the numeric keypad, and it's not really rendering it out, what it's doing, it's buffering to the RAM. So it gives me playback. If you do not have a numeric keypad, you got to come up to composition. It's either preview, and it's either this one or pre-render. Nope, not pre-render. Let me close that. I don't actually remember. I'm going to delete these, sorry. Go back to this tab. I don't remember the non-shortcut key for preview. It should just be preview. There it goes. Okay, so it's previewing it, storing it into the RAM. It'll take some time. I'm not going to let it go all the way through and waste your time. But see, there's part of the scene. Okay. So I can play with it, of course, while it's in After Effects. Let's say I want to adjust the levels in the scene. I can go to the Effects presets and type in levels. And so I've applied it with, I had the layer selected, by the way, and I double clicked on it and applied. And let's just bring up the black a little bit. Bring up the brightness a little bit. And just to show you the difference, if I hit the FX button, it depends on what kind of look I'm going for my scene. Okay. So what else? Maybe some audio. Now I went to videocopilot.com, or sorry, .net, videocopilot.net, to the product page, and I bought the Motion Pulse audio clips. It's a great audio resource. It's like audio effects. So let me go ahead and import one of those. Let's see, atmospheric low 1. I'm going to drag and drop it into my projects panel. Okay, and I can drag and drop it to the timeline. So now if I hit the 0 key, let it render. You can see here that now I've got some sound effects. I'm going to drag it forward a little bit. I'm actually going to open up the arrow keys here And with audio, I'm going to hit the stop. I'm going to slide in a little bit first, maybe about there. And hit this stopwatch here so it sets a keyframe. Go back to the beginning and dial this all the way down to -48. So the audio fades in. Let me go to the end. Hit this little icon here to create a keyframe. Go all the way down to the end and -48. So now the audio will fade in and fade out. That's pretty much it. So let's export this. I'm going to go composition and add to render queue. I'm going to go lossless. Switch it to QuickTime. Format options. Now I'm going to do a QuickTime PNG just to keep the quality, but of course you can choose H.264 if you're just trying to get really good playback, because PNG will probably be a little hard on playback with certain computers. I figure this would probably be uploaded to YouTube anyway, so YouTube would encode my PNG encoder into whatever it needs, so I'll leave it at PNG. And of course you have other options, but most of the time you'll probably use H.264 or PNG for a final output. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And RGB, that's fine. I don't need an alpha channel, so I'm good with all that. I definitely want to exporting the audio, so make sure that the audio is set to audio out or auto, or set it to on. I'm going to click OK. And I'm going to give it a file name. Just call it DESK scene. Okay, now something I forgot to mention, under my tutorials 3D Desk, I created a folder called Edit, and that's where I'm going to save my work to. And I can even, I'll call this desk scene and give it a date if I wanted to, if I think I'm going to render multiple versions of this out. I think it's fine. So let's go ahead and hit save. And before I even render this, I'm going to go File, Save As, and save the actual project file within here. So I was testing something earlier, so I'm just going to go ahead and delete that one. And I'll call this desk edit. And again, I'm saving it into the edit folder. So I have my 3D folder, my edit folder, my reference folder. So go into edit folder, desk edit, save. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and hit render. And it's going to render through. The new version of After Effects does not give me a playback. And I'm going to go ahead and stop the video and let it finish up. Okay, it finished rendering. So let's go ahead and minimize this, close this. I'll go to 3D Desk, edit, and here's my final render. So double click this. And like I said, being that it's a QuickTime PNG encoder, this might actually take a little bit of time to play back. And click the play button. And it's playing back really bad in my computer, but at least you can see the final outcome. So it looks pretty good. It's really short, but... Alright, so you guys are done. Now if you want to learn a little bit about Mental Ray and rendering out of Mental Ray mode instead of the standard render, go ahead and join me for part 9 of this tutorial series.